Oh, I am excited for this one. Okay, so PJ, I want to start today with the beginning for you. And how did you make your way into this very weird but wonderful world of venture? Let's start with that.
I was recruited to a private equity firm, and I hated it. So then I acquired one of the portfolio companies that was really doing incredibly poorly. The good news was that it cost me $1 to acquire it. The bad news is that it costed more than $1 million a year to run it. We eventually turned it around, and I thought then I'd become an expert in internet because we basically used very cheap internet technology to turn that company around. And then I wanted to become an investor, raising a fund, and I was unsuccessful, so then I was recruited to a fund instead.
Got it. I do have to ask though, because a big thing for me that I'm very cognizant of is I haven't seen macro market cycles, you know, the booms, the busts. You've seen that, you've lived it. What have you taken from that experience to today?
Yeah, so we went through a really tough slump in '97, one between 2001 and 2003, and then obviously the one in 2008, 2009. And those were really profound and transformational, not only for our industry, but also for all the founders that were involved in their startups at the time. And it just as everyone knows that 95% of the values were destroyed in the dot-com crash, but nobody knows, or very few know, that in 2008 to 2009, 95% of the values in the entire clean tech industry were totally wiped out. And that was an industry where Europe was leading, and it is no more.
Got it. No, absolutely. You mentioned kind of value accrual there, and I do have to ask, in terms of macro and pricing in particular, I'm always fascinated by price sensitivity. I actually had Josh Koppelman on the 20-Minute VC, and he said that pricing is 95% science, 5% art when you know when to stretch on price. How do you think about pricing?
Well, I think pricing is a function of aligned interests, which I think is an incredibly important and often overlooked element of the partnership between the founder and the VC. That you need to be on the same side of the table this moment you have signed the investment agreement. And that means that if things really change quickly, like everything is going really well or really bad, you should be working for the same solution. And that is not the case many times when you either have too high valuations, because that typically results in the rounds being also attached to a number of like preference terms and stuff like that, and anti-dilution mechanisms and stuff like that. That is actually a way to further the aligned interests from each other, and I don't think that's a healthy thing. It doesn't help when the shit hits the fan, so to speak.
Can I ask, in terms of the aligned interests, absolutely agreed. It's incredibly hard though for the founders to know signing the term sheet and really aligning in terms of the investment itself. How can founders stress test that alignment pre-investment and in that kind of dating phase?
Yeah, I think in days like this, when the markets are really hot, I think it's naturally tempting for any founder to try to maximize the valuation, and I don't blame them for doing that either. But I think there is a long sort of timeline as multiple steps before you hit the sort of finishing line where you IPO your company or something like that. And if you go too far on the valuation and in, say, a Series A, and then you hit a snag somewhere, then you may kill your ability to raise a Series B. And you may even kill your company as a consequence. So thinking about that, I want my investors also to be resilient with me and not overpromise and underdeliver due to stuff that actually is out of your control as a founder. So I think thinking about that, making sure that you are also friends in bad times, because they will come in every startup, regardless of its good or bad times in the general economy.
You said about taking money at high valuations there. I had someone on the show the other day and they said when there's money on the table, take it. You never know what the macro is going to do. Would you agree with that? If the money's on the table, always take it because it's extra reserves, extra runway, it's security? Or is that maybe simplistic thinking?
No, I think it is extremely important for the founder to choose which money to take rather than take money off the table. So if there are plenty of opportunities and things to choose between, then I think you should definitely go through the effort and diligence whatever options you have and how they have dealt with critical situations before, what kind of founder relationship they typically have. But at the end of the day, if you need money to run your business, that's probably the last thing that you can compromise on. So I wouldn't blame them for taking the money when it's there.
You said there about kind of snag times, and they can always happen. Challenges are always occurring. You've seen some of the fastest growing European tech companies over the last decade. Are there commonalities in the challenges and snags that they hit along the growth scaling story?
Yeah, I think that I've been fortunate to be a part of 3 multi-billion-dollar exits: Spotify, iSettle, and Avito, and all 3 of them have been close to death many times each. That has been a matter of days, sometimes even hours, before you have sort of solved a very, very critical problem. So I think that is a part of the value of bringing an experienced VC to the table that doesn't get jitters as soon as there is a problem in the company, and I think that all successful companies have gone through such really critical moments.
You mentioned Spotify there. I do have to ask, you obviously saw Daniel scaling as CEO through the process. What were some of the biggest lessons from seeing Daniel scale as CEO into the incredible leader that he is today?
Yeah, it wasn't evident for him, because when we started talking about investing back in 2007, he actually stated that he did not want to be the CEO. And here is his big brother, by the way. Eventually, Daniel actually understood that he was the natural leader in the room, because he was sitting with the vision. It was a vision of completeness, and it's also, I think, his greatest quality as a leader, which was already very evident back then, was that he, as few others, have the capability to go from the lowest level of detail to the highest level of abstraction effortlessly, and then describe how these connect to everyone in the organization, and including outsiders like myself and investors. So I get to understand how important it was that a certain type of code was done in order to, as the first service ever, that when you pressed play, it started play right away. Not knowing, of course, that what you played was the first several seconds was really shitty quality, but I got the impression that this was the first service that ever started playing right when you actually played the play button. And that was not the case for any other service in the market. And he understood how important that was. Whereas perhaps some other leader would sort of not see the sort of strategic differentiation of that user experience.
In terms of Daniel as a person, back in that kind of investment period when you made the first investment, when we chatted before, you said that he insanely impressed you from first meeting to actually making the investment. Can I dig in and ask, what specifically impressed you so much in that relatively compressed period between meeting and investment?
Apart from the ability to move effortlessly between levels of abstraction, I think also he has the ability to both be very confident that what they are doing is good. At the same time, he's extremely paranoid that it's not good enough. And that he really is constantly searching for something that's even better. And he's doing it from a perspective not serving himself, but serving his customers. And And the thing is that Spotify is actually a pretty complex business because he's serving two masters, both the creator and the consumer. And in the middle, there is this really big blob of power being the record labels that he couldn't piss off in the meantime. But he was not pleasing them ultimately. He was pleasing the consumer and the creator. And that has taken almost 10 years to sort of manifest in this product that they now have in the market, which is basically a two-sided marketplace.
Can I ask, I'm always fascinated in terms of like investment decision making within partnerships. As you said there, it was multiple players in the market, quite almost a different deal for the partnership to come to a conclusion on. And I'm always questioning whether unanimity is the right way to do investment decision making within partnerships, or whether it should be kind of individual conviction based. How do you think about it, having backed $3 billion companies now?
Yeah, we have within Northzone, we're convinced that consensus is a bad idea because it's so hard to be fully up to speed on all the nuances, and ultimately it is very much a relationship game between the responsible partner and the entrepreneur that you're backing. But what we find is extremely important is that the partner group can help you to avoid making mistakes. So you can basically avoid if you get infatuated in a founder, which you do. And you can also avoid the mistakes of basically having going after companies that have been funded elsewhere because you didn't do your homework. But eventually, you need to have strong conviction individually, and maybe one or two other partners that are, equally enthusiastic. But we don't believe in consensus.
Can I ask, another thing that's super interesting in terms of decision making is also location and where people are. Northzone done incredibly well in terms of doing a multi-office partnership. What do you think is key to your success in doing the multi-office partnership?
I think we were founded on the principle of very strong meritocratic and transparency values within the partnership. So the original founders of Northzone, they decided that no one of the partners actually had automatic access to the future funds, because all of us had to carry our own weight in order to be invited to the next fund. And in order to be that effective in terms of meritocracy, you need to be transparent about what we mean, what is performance. And given that also performance in the venture industry is so long-term that you can invest and then it takes like 6-7 years before you know if it's a success or a failure. So it really puts tremendous stress on your internal decision mechanism. But having that very well in place already back in 1996, I think has served us well, and we have gradually expanded. There is none of the original partners still in the investing roles, but we are still very much steeped in their idea that they put in place.
I do want to finish before we move into a quick fire on Europe as an ecosystem. It seems to have reached this kind of inflection point in its development that all VCs have been talking about for decades. Would you agree with that statement? And why do you think we've reached this kind of catalytic moment of European growth?
Yeah, I think Europe has only for about 5 years had a complete financing system in place from angels to seed investors to early stage to growth investors. And that has made it possible to optimize for the upside. Going back only 10, 15 years, you could be sitting on a really excellent company that just couldn't find growth financing. So you had to basically search for an early exit. And you thought that selling to Microsoft for $60 million was a good outcome. You actually thought that was a good outcome back in sort of mid-2000s. I think now that is considered a bad outcome, and it's a tremendous mental difference also. I think apart from the fact that we actually do deliver now in terms of outcome, over the past 4 years, Europe has outperformed as a VC asset class the other geographies worldwide. And last year, I think 6 of the 8 biggest IPOs in the world were European.
Yeah, I know, I did love that stat too. I do have to ask though, because of the growth of the ecosystem and some of the incredible players we mentioned, we're seeing more and more interest from real tier ones in the US coming to Europe. Sequoia, Benchmark, Founders Fund, Google Ventures. How do you think about that? Is that concerning? Is that good for our ecosystem? What are your thoughts?
Well, venture capital is very much a collaborative enterprise as well. So as often as we are competing against the Excels of the index of the world, we're also cooperating in co-investment schemes. And that is incredibly good for the ecosystem at large. And I think also that's the same way we relate to the US entrance into the market. And they typically look to invest in slightly later stages than we would do, most of the larger names in Europe, which means that they fill an important role in being the bridge to becoming even stronger and more successful in a global scale.
If you were to kind of self-evaluate the European market and say, these are the points we've done well, these are the points we've done badly, I'm specifically interested on actually improvements. What more can we do to improve the European ecosystem and really reach the next higher level?
I think in terms of what we do in our industry, I think we are probably not selling ourselves as well to the capital market as the US does, because I think there is a lot of demand for getting exposure to European venture, and the fact that we have a shorter time history, we need to prove ourselves a little bit more to some. However, as a geography and more from a legislative standpoint, I think we are still playing not completely with a level playing field when it comes to, for instance, taxation on options and incentive programs. That's something that I think would speed up the transition from people working in old industry, low growth areas and move them into the high growth area and make that much more efficient and also ultimately generate a lot more cash for the governments.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you there on that point especially. I do want to move into my favorite element though of any interview that I do. So I say a short statement and then PJ, you give me your immediate thoughts in less than 60 seconds per one. Okay? So your favorite book and why? What must we all read?
Yeah, A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. He is writing about the attempted assassination of Bob Marley in Kingston, 1976. It's a phenomenal book.
When I say success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
To be quite honest, it's my dad. He never finished high school, and he became a jazz drummer and toured in Europe. And then he was recruited to a commercial bank as a clerk, and then he made his way all the way up to the top.
What's your biggest strength and then your biggest weakness?
I think my biggest weakness is probably that I'm very disorganized.
Me too.
Yeah, but I think my biggest strength is that I think I tend to connect really well to people and understand what they really want.
What's the biggest misnomer about VC? There's a lot written about VC as an industry. What's the biggest misconception?
Well, I think it's one misconception is that it's that most people think that you just go in and do investment, and like actually 99% of the work is a waste of time. So 50% of the time you look at companies that you won't invest in, and then the other 50% of the time you work with the companies you have invested in, and of which half of them are successful and they don't need you, and the other half of that, they need you a lot, but they fail.
This is really unfair of me to throw in, but I do want to ask it. How do you think about time allocation across portfolio? I've had some people say, just spend time with the winners. They're the ones that are going to return your fund. Others say, totally not how a reputation is built.
Well, I think that going back again to Spotify and Daniel, I think I played a very important role in the first couple of years when it comes to being almost like a shrink or something like that to Daniel and his team. But after that, they had it all. I didn't provide a lot of value. On the other hand, there are companies that are not doing so well. They are struggling with resources that they just need to get shit done, and you can help them. That doesn't create a lot of value, but it's something that you just need to do. So as much as you want to spend much time with the winners, they don't want you to have a hand on the steering wheel either. So you should just stay out of there.
And then final one, what's the most recent investment and why did you say yes and get so excited?
It was. It's actually not announced yet, so I won't say the name of it. But it's in the group travel space, and it's a phenomenal founder, like 27 years old, already a serial founder, and growing like crazy with like this kick-ass quality.
Listen, PJ, I've wanted to do this for a very, very long time. So thank you so much for doing this with me today, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Harry.